All right, in this short demo, we're going to show you how to build a Kubeflow pipeline using the KFP SDK for the Kaggle American Express default prediction competition. If you haven't done so already, you're going to want to deploy Kubeflow. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be using Ricto's Kubeflow as a service. So from the home page, we're going to want to create a new notebook. So click on the new notebook item. And the first notebook that we're going to create is going to be a notebook that we're going to use to create a pod default. And this is going to allow us to not have to pass our Kaggle credentials in clear text when we actually run the pipeline. So we just took all the defaults and we launched it. So once it's up and running, let's go ahead and connect to the notebook. Now that it's up, the next thing that we want to do is head on over to Kaggle.com, go to your account, and if you haven't already done so, make sure to generate an API token. And when you do this, you'll get a Kaggle.json file, and in it will be a username and a API token. So here we want to substitute in your Kaggle username as well as your API key and run the Kaggle create secret command. So once your secret has been created, let's go ahead and create a Kaggle underscore pod YAML file that will have the specifications that we're going to use for our pod default. And once those contents are pasted in there and saved, we are ready to now go ahead and create our pod default at the command line. So open up a terminal and execute the appropriate Kaggle apply command. And from here, we can confirm that our pod default is set, and we can also confirm that our Kaggle secret is set. And with these confirmations done, we are ready to launch our notebook that we'll use to create our American Express Kaggle competition. So we're just going to name it Amex KFP. Here we want to bump up the CPU to 8 and we want to bump up the RAM to 16. We also want to bump up the workspace volume to 50 gigs as opposed to 5. And here under configurations, let's make sure that we select Kaggle secret so that we won't have to supply the Kaggle credentials when we run the pipeline. Instead, it'll pull from that default. So launch the notebook. Once it's up and running, go ahead and connect to it. This will bring up the Jupyter Lab UI. Next, let's go ahead and go to the terminal. And from here, we're going to want to git clone the Kubeflow/examples repository. And once that repository is downloaded, you'll see that we now have an examples directory in the left-hand side. Let's go ahead and double-click on examples, locate the American Express project, double-click on it, and the notebook that we're interested in is the KFP notebook. So from here, let's go ahead and start working through the contents of the notebook. The first thing to do is to upgrade pip. So let's go ahead and run that command. And once that command completes, let's go ahead and upgrade the Kubeflow pipeline components. I'm going to remove the quiet argument there so we can actually see all the output. And once our Kubeflow pipeline components are installed, we can confirm the version of the SDK that we're using. And you can see here the confirmation is telling us we're using version 1.8.11. Next up, we're going to want to import the Kubeflow pipeline components and libraries. So let's go ahead and run that. And with that completed, we're ready to start building our pipeline component. The first pipeline component that we want to build is going to be our download data step. So let's go ahead and run that component. The next one is going to be the load data step. Our third step is going to be the feature engineering component. And then we move on to the modeling step. So let's go ahead and build that component. And then we wrap things up with the evaluation step. So let's go ahead and build that component. And with that, we are ready to now create the pipeline components using the create component from func option. And then next up, let's go ahead and create the Kubeflow pipeline using the domain-specific language of the Kubeflow pipeline component. Now let's go ahead and create the Kubeflow pipeline client. Let's apply it some arguments, and then let's go ahead and run the pipeline. And you'll see that we have a run details hyperlink. Let's click on that. That'll take us directly to the runtime execution graph where we can see our pipeline execute in real time. You can see that we've created a data volume. We are now downloading the data. We then move on to loading the data. And once that completes, we move into our feature engineering step. And with that completed, we move on to the modeling step. And then we wrap things up with our final step, which is going to be the evaluation step. And with that completed, you have successfully created a Kubeflow pipeline using the SDK for the American Express Kaggle competition. You can see we have our run output as well as our more sophisticated graph.